Yes, I will speak about globalization. We have some research in my university. I think I will summarize many things you already know, but maybe also some new things. So what I will do is first give you a kind of empirical overview about the globalization we have. And as Heike has mentioned, we have a divide. And then I give you also an overview what economic models can contribute to explain that. I will skip completely currency hierarchy because Barbara Fritz gave a whole lecture about that. So because currency hierarchy is also a good explanation why countries in the global south do not develop. And then I ask what we found out during this research in my university. Do we have a kind of new imperialism? What changed from the early 1920s when we had this debate about imperialism? Okay, let's look at some empirical data. And I feel this is a really shocking diagram because it shows that when you look at GDP per capita, purchasing power parity, etc., you see there is really no catching up. There is no catching up. The highest line, as you can see, are the developed countries, and you see there's really not much movement when you look at real GDP per capita for the low-income countries, etc. Remember 2000, 3000, that's level, and here we have more concrete, the low-income countries, and of course we have China. China increasing GDP per capita, but still far away from United States or Germany. And China is also a country which, of course, did not follow a kind of purely market-based approach. So I found that very shocking, and the question is, how can we explain that? And here also you know the income distribution of the world. So the bottom 50%, you know, very slight improvement, but very, very high inequality in the world economy and really no substantial catching up. What we can find actually is reduction of absolute poverty. It substantially went down. So we have a lifting of the living standard, so to say, globally, but as mentioned, no catching up. How can we summarize the development in the world? There's a reduction in absolute poverty. There's a certain increase in GDP per capita, also in low-income countries, but there is, for most countries in the world, there is no tendency that they in any way are reaching a level of GDP per capita or income as in the developed world, except some countries like China and a few others, but for the majority, this is not the case. And I have a nice quote here. I have to read it. Global inequality seems to be about as great today as it were at the peak of Western imperialism in the early 20th century. Indeed, the share of income presently captured by the poorest half of the world's people is about half what was in 1820 before the great divergence between Western countries. This is from the World Bank. Interesting that the World Bank mentions the imperialism in the early 19th century. Okay, now I come to my second part. How can we explain the lack of catching up? And what I will do, I give you a very short overview about economic models which can explain that, and I feel economic knowledge is not too bad. We have good models that can explain it, and some of the models you may know, of course. The first one, natural advantages and Dutch disease. You know all Dutch disease. If you have a lot of natural resources, your exchange rate will be too high for the industrial sector. If you have a systematic, so to say, from the exchange rate, a systematic situation where the industrial sector is not competitive, I think, my opinion, is a major explanation why countries suffering from Dutch disease or from natural resources do not develop. In addition, we have volatility of natural resources creating shocks. The tax base is often based on natural resources. Corruption is especially high, etc. So that's a very well-known model, but I think it can explain part of non-catching up. Comparative advantages, we all know Ricardo, blah, 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 yeah. We know less developed countries concentrate on low-tech, low value-adding, labor-intensive activities, and high developed countries on high-tech, etc., productions. And we all know the long debate from Friedrich List to Stiglitz to Chang, etc., etc. I think it's very, very clear if you let the market work and you have comparative advantages, you are pushed to distribution of labor in which the innovative power in the countries which are less developed is poor. That's pretty clear. So I think that's also a very, very well-known model. Let's come to Paul Krugman. Paul Krugman uses external economies of scale, and he argues if you have external economies of scale and you have first movers, you have the development of economic clusters with high innovative power. And it is extremely difficult for latecomers to catch up. And actually, I have no quote about that. Paul Krugman quotes Lenin and Hilferding, etc. And he argues, my model can exactly explain what Lenin tells us, the lack of development in the countries of the global south. And if we add internal economies of scale, Krugman did not do that in his paper, but if we add internal economies of scale, then it becomes even more difficult for latecomers to catch up. They cannot develop national champions. And we know from development debate, national champions are of key importance to catch up. So as soon as we have internal and external economies of scale, it's very difficult for latecomers to catch up. The market will not deliver catching up. Now let's come to the global value chains, and we had some research in my university about that. Global value chains exploded in the 1990s because of deregulation, because of substantial cut in transportation costs, communication costs. Global value chains simply mean you produce a good, you cut the production of a good in different tasks, and these different tasks are produced in different countries. That's the logic of global value chains. And the OECD, for example, found that the global value chains became even deeper when you look at historical development. And less developed countries just take over the production stage, the low value adding activities. The high value adding activities are taken over in countries which are more developed. And I think to understand global value chains, you can have two approaches. First, again, Ricardo, the logic of comparative advantages also works in global value chains. So the simple tasks go to the global south. But what is very, very important, you have governance of global value chains by lead firms. And the governance of the global value chains is characterized by asymmetric power relationships. I think that's of very big importance. And we have, when we look at the role of multinational companies, these are the lead firms, so to say, we have really an explosion of multinational companies. Don't want to go into details. So 1970, you had 7,000, early 2000s, you have 77,000 multinational companies. So we have really very intensive integration of trade in multinational, controlled by multinationals. And I was also shocked by that the 500 largest multinationals control 70% of international trade. So you have a really big role of multinational firms. Yeah, what is a typical constellation in global value chains? When you look at the theoretical debate, and you find that in many, many case studies. We did that for the car industry, for garment and IT, whatever you like. The lead firm is usually, we called it, in a rent-seeking paradise. Why? It can rent-seeking on both sides. On the supply side, because when the lead firm usually has a position of a monopsony or oligopsony, the demand monopoly. So this, let's say there is hyper competition of, let's say, suppliers of certain garment products, and we have only a few number of big lead companies. And these asymmetric power relationships, traditional microeconomics tells us, will lead to a situation that the price for supplies is pushed to a minimum, that the profits of suppliers are pushed to a minimum, and then you can start long stories about bad working conditions, about really pushing suppliers in a very, very bad situation. In case of foreign direct investment, we have more or less similar situation. And usually on the supply side, we have also oligopoly, so we have high rents earned also on the demand side. And we also can have competitive markets, but then we have the consumers benefiting. I think from this whole model, that was our conclusion, from this whole model, not only multinationals benefit, but also the consumers benefit in the global north and partly in the global south as well. So it's also good for consumers, especially in the global north. How much time do you have? 30 minutes. 13, okay. So what are the effects of global value chains? To make that very short, you have some technological spillover to suppliers, also in the case of foreign direct investment. But this technological spillover is limited. There is no incentive in case of subcontracting and also in case of foreign direct investment to push functional upgrading. That's theoretically clear and empirically clear. Lead firms have no incentive really to create own competitors for catching up. And this is, of course, a big problem. You may have positive employment effects in some countries, less developed countries, but you don't have really catch up in productivity because lead firms have no interest to do that. And I found this diagram very interesting. This is the employment share in industry, percent of total employment. And you see the black, the highest line, we have a kind of deindustrialization, if you like, in the developed world. Yeah, so why? Of course, to a substantial extent, productivity and the production, simple productions are shifted to the less developed countries, and we have an increase in employment share for lower and upper middle income countries. In low income countries, not much happens. So we have, if you like, a certain deindustrialization in the global north and a certain industrialization with primitive productions in the global south. Just very quickly, I won't go into details. These are cross-border income flows from foreign direct investment. Okay, of course, global north gets a lot of profit inflows, and this is profit outflows. Brazil, for example, Mexico, they have a lot of profit outflows. This is, by the way, not good for less developed countries because it reduces investment capacities because profits are flowing out, and it also reduces demand in the countries. Let me come to the question, do we have a new imperialism, or do we still have the old imperialism in a new, in a new form, let's say? What was the idea of the old imperialism? And here we have Lenin, Luxemburg, Hilferding, and so on, Hobson. What was the idea? The idea was 1900, 1910, 1920, when this debate really took place. We have a tendency towards oligopolistic and monopolistic markets. We have coalition or working together between the financial sector and the newly created oligopolies, monopolies. We have, from the late 19th century, we have increasing capital flows, capital outflows to the colonies for plantation, for mining, for railways, not so much not for industrial development. We have even India as a good example for deindustrialization by this development. We have profits flowing to the developed countries at that time. And we had cheap resources, cheap plantation fruits, etc., etc. And remember, Lenin spoke about aristocracy of working class, or fractions of the working class. Also, he argued benefited from this model by increasing the living standard, etc. At that time, there was no real big industrialization in many of the colonies. Yeah, today, and we found out today we have more or less the same structure, except some changes. First, we have partly industrialized the global south with low value tasks. So not only mining, etc., became a topic, but heavy industrialization in parts of the global south. We have very cheap products in garment and other industries as well. And who is benefiting? Benefiting are the consumers, basically in the global north. Our nice colleague, Markus Wissen, a colleague from my university, he speaks about an imperialist living style, and I think he's right. A big part of our high living standard depends on cheap products produced in the global south. We have extreme concentration of power of monopolies and oligopolies. They earn huge profits. This adds to inequality. So I would say overall we have an even more intensive type of imperialism compared to the early 1920s. We have these exploitive structures, and my conclusion is globalization is in a crisis. we have this exploitive structure, and I don't speak about the ecology, that's a difference. We have exploitive structures, and we have, for most countries, no catching up, especially if these countries follow more market-based strategies. We have countries, as mentioned, not following market-based policies like China and others. They are more successful. But globalization, inequality is only very, very little reduced, and there's no catching up. We have a divide, which there's no perspective how this can be changed. And only 3 minutes or 2 minutes even. What can be done? I think it's clear you need heavy policies against the market mechanism, because the market mechanism will lead to no development. So that means heavy industrial policy, not only horizontal, but also vertical industrial policy, heavy vertical industrial policy. Tony Roderick speaks about the globalization trilemma. I think he is right. So he argues we have these multinationals. We have the competition between different countries because of market processes. Democracy is eroding. There are only two solutions. World government, he argues that's probably not possible and maybe also not such a good idea, at least not in the foreseeable future. So we need deglobalization. And I think really what we should push for is we need a certain deglobalization, control of international capital flows, more regional trade, internalize ecological costs in transportation to reduce global trade. So I think without really stopping the market mechanism, creating inequalities and no development, this divide in globalization cannot be realized. This sounds not very realistic, but sorry for that. I think if we go on as we went on in the past, this divide in the world will not change, and this will create probably heavy political and other problems. Thank you very much.